What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Tonight, Randy is about to go off. He is angry, he is steaming mad. We're going to be talking about the future of tournament bass fishing and Randy's favorite topic, LiveScope. This is a can't miss seminar, can't miss live stream for you guys. I'm excited to kind of get into it. You guys know I'm a big fan of electronics. Randy, not so much, and it's gonna be a good one. So Randy, how's it going? Try to keep it cool, keep your shirt on. We need to keep it PC for the kids.
Man, I'm fired up today, Johnny. I got thinking about it, man. The last couple of weeks I've been thinking about it, and I've been reading every one of these tournaments are getting one on LiveScope, every single one of them. And I was like laying in bed this morning before the crack of dawn thinking about this. And it's like, I've had enough, man. I've just had enough of it. I don't want anything to do with LiveScope. I think it's terrible for the sport. I think it has no business out here. And I'll probably be talking about this a lot over the next week, even on my own YouTube channel and tonight, explaining why I feel like that. But man, I feel like a big weight is off my shoulder because I was trying to man, should I try this or do I need to do it? I need to stay open-minded. I mean, I need to keep up with the times. And I just wasn't being true to myself. That's just not who I am. But after a lot of self-reflection, I'm officially doubling down on the anti-livescope, active target, whatever is out there. So, yeah, I feel really good about it.
Oh man, well, we're going to get into all that. I want to get your take on why you're completely going anti-livescope, no livescope, and we're going to get into all that. I want to welcome everyone to the stream over here, though. We got a lot of regulars on. Got Ryan, Darren, Christian, Daryl, Kendall, Donald, PK. How's everyone doing? Got Dan, Patrick, John, everyone. Good to see you, and really excited to kind of talk about the future of tournament bass fishing. I'm a little bit more level-headed about this whole thing. I do have a really cool video coming up, Randy, I'm going to do a little sneak preview on. I've actually had huge computer issues the last couple of weeks. I tried to update my computer a little bit, and I didn't, know what I was doing as well as I needed to, and I think I fried something, so I can't edit any YouTube videos right now. And I'm trying to order a brand new computer, but if you guys know what Bitcoin is, these guys are buying up all the nice computer parts for Bitcoin, but it's also, I need those computer parts to edit YouTube videos. So I had to order a computer from different place, and it's going to take like a month to get here. So we're going to try to make do with what we can with some friends' computers and stuff, but the upload schedule for the main Fish the Moment channel is going to be a little bit slow for the next couple of weeks just because of that. Apologies there, but I have a video, Randy, that I'm super excited about that's going to maybe make you feel a little bit better about LiveScope and also make you feel a little bit worse. I think it's going to be a little bit of both, but I'll give a preview on that as well. But before we jump into that, I kind of want to give a update on what's been going on with tournament bass fishing and what's making Randy so frustrated with tournament bass fishing in general. So let me start sharing my screen here. First thing that I wanted to talk about was some of the recent Major League Fishing tournaments. For example, here on Sam Rayburn Lake. This is actually some overhead views I want to show you guys of Wesley Strodew, who finished second in this Major League Fishing round today after 2 days, and he was fishing offshore on brush piles with a jerkbait using the LiveScope. He was watching every single fish. There's a segment I was watching today, Randy, where he was like, man, there's 3 fish in this brush pile. Catches one. Oh, I'm going to catch the other 2. Catches the next one. He catches all 3 fish out of that brush pile, and he was calling it out, watching these fish bite it. He basically could have named them at that point because he was so familiar with these fish. And he's just out here in the middle of the lake. It's super calm and just throwing a jerkbait around on brush piles. And it's the same way Dustin Connell was catching them as well, who led after the first round. Spencer Shuffield's catching them on Rayburn with a drop shot using the LiveScope. LiveScope is everywhere. Now, better news for you, Ott Defoe actually ended up winning the round, and he was catching a lot of his fish up in shallower bushes. And another win for the non-LiveScope guys was Bill Lowen finally getting the W on Pickwick Lake. We had some extreme conditions over there with some high water, muddy water, and he caught him flipping a jig, caught an 8-pounder on the last day. Bill Lowen is, river guy, used to really tough fishing conditions on some of the rivers in the Midwest area. So Great job to Bill catching them, flipping basically a black jig all week. So, there are some guys winning from the shallow water. We got Bill, shallow water angler. We got John Cox, who won that Major League Fishing events, Tackle Warehouse Pro Circuit events. So there's some guys catching them up shallow still, but there's a lot of guys dominating with that live scope. And you had a tournament too you wanted to talk about, Randy, on the Harris chain as well.
Yeah, I was just thumbing through some of the social media stuff today, and I read that I can't remember, it was Tommy Tompkins' son won the MLF tournament down at the Harris chain, the MLF, 2 weeks last week, and he was live scoping in canals at the Harris chain. It's like you have this vision that live scope is this deep water offshore type of deal, but it's becoming a dominating factor in all water levels, all water columns right now. And when somebody gets dialed into that, they just blow the tournament away. I mean, just like Patrick Wallers did at Lake Fork, just like, Tompkins did at Harris Chain. He won by 15 pounds down there. And what it's doing, I mean, it's allowing some guys that are dialed into that to win these tournaments by historic margins, that we just don't ever see anymore.
Yeah, it's just crazy because the live scope, I think the reason the guys are dominating so much with this live scope, and I honestly think the reason that it's not dominating any more than it is because guys just don't know how to use it yet. A lot of these guys have sponsorship deals where they weren't able to get it. Like I know some of the guys on the Lowrance team, they were running Lowrance units and they couldn't run the Garmin live scope. Well, now they have the active target. And now recently I know that Mega Live imaging was just posted over on tacklewarehouse.com. I'll pull that up really quick just to show you guys. It's available now. I actually think I might be able to get one here pretty soon. I might be potentially on a short list to get this to show you guys the Mega Live. But here it is on Tackle Warehouse. They're out of stock right now. I don't know when they're going to be in stock or when it's shipping or all that stuff. But they kind of give a little view of it if you want to check out the Humminbird's version of live imaging. They don't actually have any images or anything up yet, but at least they show what the transducer looks like, if anything. So basically, everyone now is going to have this live imaging, and I think, again, the reason I don't think it's dominating as much as you probably would expect it to is just because guys haven't had a chance to use it as much as they would need to. Now, the reason I think that it's going to dominate so much is because basically, if we look over the years, Randy, I just kind of have a graphic I wanted to pull up here. If we look over the years, the primary way that guys catch fish day in, day out in the professional tour or anywhere are fish that are either related up into shallow water, like on a shallow bush or a shallow laydown, visible objects, or they're catching fish that are related to the bottom offshore, whether it's on offshore ledges or offshore brush piles, rock piles, things like that. When bass are related to an object, you can actually find those fish easily with side imaging, down imaging, just traditional sonar stuff, or by just visually looking for targets down the bank and flipping at them. The thing with live scope that's awesome, though, is that you can actually see the bass that are suspended out in the middle of the water column or suspended over shallow cover, deep cover, whatever it is. These fish are a lot trickier to catch because you have to basically put a bait right in front of their face to get them to bite. They're not going to bite very well just fishing a jig down below them underneath the bottom. The live scope then allows you to put that bait right in front of that fish's face and kind of play with it and toy with it. At the same time, you can also find a lot of fish that are suspended out here out in the middle of the water column. They're chasing shad. Now, a lot of guys might catch fish that are quote-unquote schooling, where bass are busting on shad on the top of the surface. You might see this on a lot of lakes, especially your clear water lakes. In the summer, in the late summer into the fall, bass will be busting on the surface. And when those bass are up busting on the surface, you can usually cast a topwater over by them, get them to bite. However, these bass are also schooling on these shad under the surface, and they're schooling all day. The only time we were able to really effectively catch them in the past, though, is when those fish would actually bust the surface and you put a bait on their nose right when they busted. But now with the live scope, you can actually follow these schooling fish around and you can put a bait like a swim bait or a drop shot in front of their nose while they're underwater. And this basically increases your effectiveness on catching schooling fish by 5 or 6 times. And you're going to be able to catch them a lot more consistently, and you don't have to do as much waiting for those fish to actually surface. What this really means at the end of the day is that these anglers and anglers in general are able to target these suspended bass, which have never been fished for effectively before. You can sometimes catch suspended fish like in the tops of trees and stuff, and you can catch those fish. It's not impossible, but it's much easier with the live scope. And really, over the years, those fish that are cover related or bottom related have dominated tournament fishing, and they're getting so much pressure from all these weekend anglers, all these tournament anglers, that it's tough to catch those fish consistently. However, these fish that are suspended, they're not used to getting targeted. They're not used to having the best anglers in the world throwing baits at them. So this is like the last untouched frontier of bass fishing. And it's kind of like when the Alabama rig first came out, Randy, where it's like it's super easy to catch fish because you can basically just throw that bait out, reel it in, and you're actually targeting a lot of these suspended fish, even if you couldn't see them, because the Alabama rig got such a big drawing power. Well, now you literally don't have to worry about drawing the fish to the bait. You can bring your bait to the fish. Now, whether that's good or bad, that's kind of where you have an issue with that, but that's why the live scope's going to be so dominant, is you're targeting a group of fish that has never been effectively targeted for the last 50 years of tournament bass fishing. Any thoughts on any of that, Randy? I know you're...
I don't even know where to begin on this. I mean, literally, I could just start talking on this and write a book on it, why it's so bad. But here's one of the things that everybody should do. All you guys out there that live scope, that like the live scope, I got a suggestion for you. Go watch the movie A River Runs Through It with Brad Pitt. This is basically a movie about the purity of trout fishing in Montana and what angling means as far as an art form, as far as being in tune with the water and being in tune with the fish and being in tune with nature. It's what attracts people to fishing. It's what makes fishing therapeutic and healthy, and it's what fishing is all about. We are at the complete opposite spectrum of that. Live scope has nothing to do with fishing. What it does, it turns sport fishing, recreational fishing, into commercial venture. You know what it reminds me of? Everybody out there, I'm sure, watches Deadliest Catch. It reminds me no different than those guys on the Bering Sea dropping crab pots down on crabs and getting them like that. It's the same type of a deal. Like I said, it's like, we can go into different aspects about the ethics of it, and then you get into the financial aspect of it. You get into the fact that it makes the sport an unlevel playing field if anglers can't afford it. Guys, I get messages all the time from young guys that are 20, 25 years old that want to get into the sport, and they say, I don't have wealthy parents, I don't have any money, I can barely afford a 15-foot flat bottom, I don't have money to spend 10 grand on electronics. It immediately puts these guys behind the ball, because if you take for example somebody like Michael Jordan or Hank Aaron or whatever these prime top performing athletes are. If they were in a position when they started out when they were 20 years old and say, hey, look, you got to spend $50,000-$60,000 in order to be able to be on our basketball team, because if you can't do that, if you can't have the equipment and technology, you can't do it. So from that standpoint, it immediately starts to turn the sport into an elitist sport from a competitive standpoint. So we can talk about the competition aspect of it. We can talk about the ethical aspect of it, the financial, platform of it, how it takes away from the purity of the sport. Just pick a topic, and I'll be glad to go off on it for a long time. But when this whole thing first came out, I was like, because Jonny, you guys ever know, he's an offshore master. He's a savant at electronics and that type of stuff. So I see all this stuff working, and I see how many hogs Jonny catches every time he goes out with the live scope. And I'm not saying he's a bad person for doing that, because he's at that age where he grasps technology so easy. I mean, he was born with it. We didn't even have computers when I was in college. We were doing everything on pen and paper when I was in college. So from my generation, we didn't adapt to that easy. So there's so much to it, man. It's just another thing about it. It's like, okay, you get somebody spends, $3,000 on a live scope this year. In 2 years from now, it's obsolete, and you have to spend another $5,000 on the newest upgrade. And it's never ending. It's just a rat race that goes on and on and on. So, like I said, we've got about 5 categories to talk about. Shoot us some comments, guys, here in the chat room, and I'll be glad to talk about them in more detail. And stay tuned, because tomorrow morning I'm getting up and I'm putting on a YouTube video on my YouTube channel, and I'm going off on this in detail. I've turned a new leaf, guys.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know you were kind of like thinking maybe I should get LiveScope, maybe I shouldn't. One thing I want to show you here, Randy, that I mean, it's not going to really change your opinion, but at least gives you something else to look at. I've been, guys, working over the last basically 3 weeks since I haven't had my computer. I kind of went like crazy with this analysis I've been trying to run, where basically I'm trying to determine how many extra fish buying a LiveScope or buying any fish finder will actually help you catch. And I showed this a little bit ago, and I'm going to show you guys because kind of some of the stuff that I've been doing, because it's a little bit, I kind of went a little bit off the wall, Randy, with this. But let me show you guys. Basically what I was trying to do is I'm trying to determine the number of bass you can catch per day. And I used a bunch of math equations. It was a lot of stuff, a lot of variables. I'm making a YouTube video about this, so I'll explain this all. Validated my results against Major League Fishing, so I'm pretty confident the results are pretty accurate and just from my personal experience. And here's what I found, Randy. Basically, what I saw is that for an expert offshore angler, adding LiveScope will help you catch more fish, though just learning your regular side imaging and down imaging is still the most impactful. But for a novice offshore angler, LiveScope isn't really actually going to help that much because you waste so much extra time. And one thing I always talk about with offshore fishing is efficiency. And one thing you'll find is that someone who has LiveScope on their boat who doesn't really know what they're doing, they're going to waste so much extra time. And I'm going to kind of save the rest of this for my video. That was my sneak peek I talked about maybe on social media. But basically what I've found with offshore fishing is efficiency. It's all probability. That's how I think about fishing in general offshore. You have a certain probability of catching fish on a certain spot. To kind of explain that a little bit more, I'll pull up Navionics here just to kind of show you guys what I'm talking about. Let's say we're on Grand Lake, for example. What I find is that on average, when I go to Grand Lake, I'm going to graph for, let's say, 4 of my 8-hour fishing day, and I'm going to find a series of spots that have fish on them. I might have fish on this offshore point, I might have fish on this offshore ridge, this hump, and another hump out here. So I found fish on 4 different spots while I was out there. Well, while I'm actually fishing, there's going to be schools of fish that are there, but they might not be actively feeding or aggressively feeding that much. So you might find there's only maybe a 25% chance you'll get bit on any of these 4 spots I found, which means I'm only going to get bit on one of these 4 spots. So I'm really not having that great of a chance to catch fish if I'm only fishing 4 areas a day. Instead, if I can fish 8 areas a day and have a 25% chance to catch fish, now I catch fish on 2 spots a day, or 3 or 4, depending on my probabilities and all that stuff. And the fewer spots you fish, the less chance you have of running into an active group of fish that's feeding, that's aggressive, that's there, that you can catch easily. Now, with the LiveScope, you can kind of pick a few extra fish off a spot. You can kind of use baits and coax them into biting, but it's pretty difficult. It's not super easy. And what I find is that guys that don't, 1, understand how to find offshore fish in the first place, 2, they don't understand the concept of not fishing a spot for like an hour and a half. I see a lot of guys have actually, like last year I was on the water a lot with guys with a LiveScope, and I was teaching them how to use it, and they would want to sit on the spot for an hour and cast at every single fish they saw on the graph. Well, half the time those fish were crappie or carp or catfish or whatever. So 1, you're wasting time casting at literal junk fish or fish you don't care about that aren't bass. Plus, you're making a lot of extra casts on a spot where those fish might not even be active. So for an average angler, I find offshore that LiveScope might actually be more detrimental to anglers than helpful, because even though you can know the fish are there, if you don't fully understand the environment and the theory and fish behavior, it doesn't help you catch more fish. However, if you understand all those things and you know when to make the move, when to change, when to adapt, it helps you catch a lot more fish. And you've seen that from our fishing trips. As soon as I got the LiveScope, I was catching 2 to 5 extra fish a fishing trip. But that's because I understand bass behavior. I understand how offshore fishing works without the LiveScope. So I think that one thing it's doing too is it's creating a bigger gap in that offshore game. What you'll find is that the guys who are really good at offshore already and have spent 5-10 years learning their craft, now you add a LiveScope and give it to them, they pick it up faster because they already understand electronics, plus they're able to more efficiently use it, so now they're catching a lot more fish, versus a guy let's say like a John Cox. If you give him a live scope, he doesn't fish offshore anyway, so he's not going to know what to do with it. As well as a guy like a Jacob Wheeler, who's an expert with electronics and knows all the ins and outs. So you have to kind of take that into account too, where it's almost like the rich get richer in this situation. The offshore anglers who are good get better. The guys who don't, like for example you, Randy, if you just took a live scope out and went offshore fishing, I guarantee you that I would probably outfish you 2-1 offshore with just a 9-inch fish finder versus you having a live scope, just because I fish offshore so much more. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think there's no doubt as far as the conversation of whether a live scope will help you catch more fish or not. Absolutely it will. I mean, it's a tool that, if you use it and master it, you're going to definitely take advantage of that technology. But my rail against it is a lot of different things. It's sort of like the Formula One racing. For years, the Formula One racing circuit allowed these automatic suspension adjusters. Basically, it allowed these cars to drive around the track without the driver doing much to it. Eventually, the organization banned these things because it was taking away from the sport. So eventually, it's the sport's responsibility to police this type of stuff. And just from a marketing television rating standpoint, I don't think a lot of tournament organizations understand that fans of tournament fishing that watch tournament fishing, they do not want to see some dude staring at the TV screen with a drop shot, jerking up 4-pound smallmouth with a live scope. They want to see Denny Brower flipping a jig into a thick bush, or Rick Clunn throwing a buzzbait behind a dock and a 5-pounder blowing up on it. I think people, just from a rating standpoint, it's a terrible idea for tournament organizations. So the whole, I don't disagree with the fact that the live scope is a remarkable piece of technology that's going to help anglers catch more fish. But for me, there's so many negatives that it brings into the sport. It's sort of like the whole idea of buying American. A lot of people they want to buy American all the time, even though it costs them more to do so, because it's a stance that they take as far as just being true to themselves. And for me, it's the same with the live scope. If I have a live scope, is it going to make me catch more fish? Absolutely. It's going to make me more competitive, but that's just not who I am as an angler. I just do not think it's good for the sport. I think it degrades and takes so much away from the sport, and I think it discriminates against a lot of anglers out there that can't afford it. But it doesn't take away from the fact that it's an effective tool to catch more fish than it is. But and we've had this conversation before about, at what point is enough enough? At what point do we say, man, we got to pull it back in a little bit? And about every other sport out there that I know about has pulled back in technology a little bit to maintain the integrity and the tradition of the sport.
Yeah, one counter argument, Randy. I got to play devil's advocate a little bit here because, it's not fun having a discussion if I just agree with you. One great point that Frank made over here that I liked is he said, Jonny nailed it. KVD dominated in the mid-2000s because he was so much better at side imaging. And I 100% agree with that. If you watch KVD and go back to the tournaments, I'm going to show you some of the areas, Randy, where he literally caught his fish during these events. Not the exact spots, but some of the lakes. Example 1, any Tennessee River lake, Kentucky Lake. He dominated on the Tennessee River because he had that really good side imaging from Humminbird before anyone else did. And he was able to graph all these offshore areas, find schools of fish with side imaging, and use down imaging to find those fish. And he could scan, and he had access to better technology than everyone else, kind of like the Tiger Woods, where he had the better golf balls and the better golf clubs for a while, and he was able to dominate. Obviously, he's really good, too, same like KVD, but they had an equipment advantage, and he was able to scan these ledges, find these fish better, and catch them. Another example, if you look back when he was fishing on Grand Lake in Oklahoma, he won a tournament over in Grand Lake. And what he was doing, Randy, is he was graphing offshore points, and one of the points he graphed was this nothing-looking point. This is the exact point he actually caught fish on in one of his tournaments. It was one of these nothing-looking points like this that's super flat and gradual, but he was using side imaging to scan it, find those fish with side imaging, just like, now I do that every single time I go fishing, and I've been doing it for 10 years, but he was doing it, I was doing that back in 2010. He was doing it back in 2006 before anyone was doing it. And basically what he was doing is scanning these points that look like nothing that no one would ever fish. And he was finding groups of fish out here on isolated little rocky spots. Another example, I'm just going to keep throwing some examples at you. If we go over, let me pull up Lay Lake. I remember there was a tournament that he won. It was a Bassmaster Classic over on Lay Lake in Alabama, and he was fishing in the back of Honey Creek. And he was back underneath this bridge back in here, and he was graphing shallow stumps and little isolated grass patches with side imaging, casting a little red-eye shad, catching them in the back of this Honey Creek area. Or Beeswax Creek, sorry, not Honey Creek, Beeswax Creek. So he was catching them back in the back of here. So just shows that back then, KVD had this massive advantage, and he dominated. He won all these Angler of the Years, won all these tournaments, did all this stuff, and back then no one was griping about, hey, we need to ban side imaging, stuff like that. Now with LiveScope, I feel like part of it is the money aspect, but back then too, you had to buy more expensive units. But I also think with social media now, it's blowing it way out of proportion. It's back then, if we had social media the way we have now, and we had access to information like we have now, people would be flipping out, especially watching all these live broadcasts and everything about side imaging, and they would say, side imaging is unfair, ban it. This is completely utterly unfair. You can see the whole bottom of the lake. This is taking the mystery out of fishing. This is cheating. And they're going to take that argument and say KVD is cheating for all his wins. But now because of social media and the live scope, it's the same exact thing. I know you're looking at the fish live and it's different, but really it's not that much different. So I think that it's just more of the age we're living in too. And maybe just guys didn't know how big of an impact that was until 10 years later. And they're like, oh, crap, that's what happened? And they're now so far removed, they don't really care. What are your thoughts on that, Randy?
Well, yeah, I mean, every time a new piece of technology comes out, there's going to be some people that adapt to it quicker than others. I mean, it's just like when some of the flashers became a little bit more high tech, David Fritz dominated on them back in the early 90s. Kevin's a good example there, and the guys like Patrick Walder and Dustin Connell and all those guys now that are really good at live scope, you're seeing the same thing. But here's another example I'll use. Why do you think they don't allow aluminum bats in the major leagues? They required them to use wooden bats still. That's because the technology of aluminum bats gives the hitter a greater advantage to hit the ball farther and more home runs. So the Major League Baseball, they reined in that technology. They keep the traditional wooden bats. And I'm venturing to say if tournament organizations receive zero financial compensation or sponsorships from electronic companies, and they would completely go off the angler's viewpoint and what the anglers wanted, I bet you would see a lot of the technology, the side imaging, live scope, all that. I bet that would be voted out. I mean, I would love to see some type of numbers on that, but just from the comments that I see, that I get from everybody, it's overwhelmingly that everybody thinks technologies went just a little bit too far there. But that just gets us back to the conversation over and over again. It's like there's two conversations here. When does it become too much? When does it become absolutely ridiculous to the point tournament organizations have to say, okay, you guys are limited to one unit on the console, one up front, or whatever like that? And the other one, like I said, it just has to do with the other rules that we have. Nobody has answered this question for me again. Everybody knows I'm a shallow water angler. I made my credentials in the early mid 90s by getting into hard access areas. Most of that was taken away from me. My ability to carry extra gas in the boat was taken away from me. My ability to get out of my boat and pull it over a sandbar was taken away from me. My ability to cut brush down in practice or in the tournament to create my own shallow cover was taken away from me. Why is that banned from tournaments? Yet some dude can spend $100,000 on electronics if he wants to. Somebody please answer that, because I don't have the answer to it. And another thing looks like that, and let's just go back, and I think I've used this analogy before because I think it's a right one. What if the PBA, the Professional Bowlers Association, what if some guy invented a bowling ball that had the ability to track and react to different lane conditions, where 95% of the time it read the lane conditions and the oil patterns, and you could get a strike 95% of the time? But this ball cost $100,000. And if you didn't have this ball, you couldn't compete on the PBA. I mean, is that cool? I mean, is just because the technology's out there, do we adopt that and let that be legal? And I sort of put that to the same life scope active target analogy.
And I think the biggest thing is just I think people are getting a little bit frustrated. I think one with the cost and one that you can actually see the fish on the screen reacting. That's what I'm getting from the comments over here. And I mean, I completely understand that. And there's some people that are giving some suggestions. One is do a no electronics tournament. I mean, at that point, if that's what you want to go for, that's great. One thing I do like about electronics is that it's not just this, like, especially, Randy, I ran side imaging and down imaging on a Humminbird Onyx unit that was 7 years old up until like 8 months ago. I didn't have LiveScope 360. I didn't have anything like that. And I was able to catch tons of fish. We had a bunch of challenges, and even in our challenges, I was still able to do really well against you without LiveScope at all. And it felt like more of a fair fight, I guess, back then without the live scope. But it took a lot of skill and time graphing, and that's one thing that guys don't like about live scope, I think, as well, is you have to fish offshore. And offshore fishing in general, when I go out, I'm graphing for 4 of my 8 hours when I go to the lake. Every time I go to the lake, I'm just driving in front of my screen for 4 hours. And that's not very fun. And one thing that I looked at when we were looking at all this tournament data, and I'll kind of pull this back up again, one thing I was showing with some of this data that I had pulled up on this video I'm going to be posting, basically what you'll find is if you look at the number of fish caught by these Major League Fishing Term anglers, and again, I'm making a video about this on the main Fish Moment channel. I've just had computer issues and I haven't been able to get it out. But these guys, if you look at the number of fish caught per day, these are guys who caught their fish offshore, and they were the round winners, the best guys on the lake that day. They're catching 17, 14, 13 bass, not huge numbers of bass. And they're fishing for 7.5 hours, and the run time between their areas, they basically only need to basically run between spots because they had practice time where they could graph and find their fish. When I go to the lake, though, I don't have the luxury of knowing where all my fish are, so I actually have to graph for my fish. So for a tournament angler, it's really great to go out and catch fish, offshore, because you can spend 2 days driving your boat around the middle of the lake, locating the humps, the ledges with the fish on them. For me, though, to find the fish, I have to spend half my day driving my boat, which for a lot of guys, they go to the lake to fish, not to graph. And for me, I like the hunting and the finding them with the electronics and then catching them. That's something I enjoy. But most guys go there because they want to cast and they want to make a bunch of casts. And I think one of the big things is it's the shift towards needing to use technology like LiveScope, side imaging even, to compete anymore. Because a lot of guys, they just want to go fish down the bank and flip like a Bill Lowen or a John Cox like they were doing, because it's a lot more accessible. You can just see, oh, there's a dock there. I could go throw a jig in that same dock and catch fish. Versus when you're out in the middle of the lake, it's like, how did this guy find a little tiny shell bed out in the middle of nowhere? Well, he spent 3 days idling around for 12 hours a day to find that one little spot, and then he caught those fish. Plus, he spent hundreds of hours learning these electronics, or thousands of hours. Plus, understanding the baits and then all this stuff. It's a ton to it, and I understand that because I teach offshore fishing all the time. It's complicated, and for me, it's fun, but for a lot of guys, it's not. And I think that's also I think it's a pushback from a lot of people because the average angler, like you said, can't relate. One thing I said on the Major League Fishing broadcast today is that it would be awesome if they could potentially, for example, pull up a screen where you could watch the live scope or the active target during the fishing day. So you have the angler and you have their active target. Because at the end of the day, when you're watching it out in the middle of the lake, it's pretty boring because you can't see what's going on their screen. But if you could watch a 5-pounder come up, eat the bait, and then watch them reel it in, like in this example right here on the live scope, it might be a little bit more engaging. And at the same time, you're just watching guys basically stare down at their computer screen or their graph screen all day, jerking a jerk bait. It's not as engaging TV, but one thing it does do is it helps anglers catch more fish. So you have to kind of balance that out too. Less exciting on the viewership between fish catches, but if you increase fish catches by 30 or 40% for live streaming, that's awesome. More fish catches, more footage, more excitement. So there's a lot at play here, Andy, but I kind of went on a big rant, but what do you think about all that?
Well, I agree completely. Everything you said, I completely agree with it. But, one of the points I'll make as far as, your ability with offshore fishing, back 300 years ago, the only way that the ships going across the ocean or in the lakes or whatever, the only way they could tell how deep the water is they tie the string onto a rock, and they'd have some guy up in the front of the boat that he would be dropping this rock down into the water and seeing how deep it was, every 15 or 20 minutes. If you had a string and a rock, Johnny, you would still catch them offshore because you understand how those fish position down there. You understand how they relate to cover. The equipment that you use to find those, you could do just as good as a flasher. I mean, you would dominate offshore with a flasher just like you would with a live scope like that. So, from that standpoint, I agree. Everybody has ways that they like to fish. Everybody has their strength that they have to fish. But I just go back again. I guess I'm just a little bit more of a more of a historian, a traditionalist. I look at sports like football, baseball, golf, tennis, all that stuff. These sports have stood the test of time. They basically remain unchanged as far as the equipment and the rules for over 100 years. Yeah, there's been some improvement in equipment, but basically it stays within the same realm. Tournament bass fishing is almost unrecognizable from it was when it started in the 70s. I mean, if you look at the way we approach the sport, the equipment changes we've had like that, it's morphed into something that I don't feel that it's morphed in. I don't feel like we're moving in the right direction is what I'm saying. I mean, and everybody can have the debate on what direction we think the sport moves in. But here's another point, what I'll stress when we get away from the pure aspect, like the movie A River Runs Through It. The way that I learned to fish and the way that I learned to love outdoors and fishing was wading creeks. There was a little creek by my mom and dad's house. I'd go down and wade it every day after school. I'd see how the current moved around rocks, and I'd see how the minnows got behind eddies, and I'd see how crawdads would relate to different sizes of rocks. And I learned so much about the natural world by observation, up close and personal. And my connection with nature drew extremely close. But when you have a segment of anglers, the new generation of anglers that completely lose touch with that, they're everything they're trying to do is focused on technology and electronics and that type of stuff. They lose touch with that connection of nature. And the more as a society that we lose touch with that connection to nature, the easier it is to destroy it. I mean, I don't think most people realize that there's 800 billion tons of plastic added to our oceans every year, and within the next 30 years, they say there's going to be more plastic in our oceans than there is the total weight of fish. So when you get away from that, when you get away from that connection to nature that comes with like wading creeks and being on an intimate level, then you lose contact with the whole natural world. And I just don't see that as a positive thing for the future of our sport, our planet, or anything, man.
Well, I agree with you there. I grew up fishing. The way I learned to fish was wading creeks, the Milwaukee River in Wisconsin. I would go almost every single day after school. It's right by my house. And I basically, for 3 or 4 years, used to take a little ultralight spinning rod with a tiny little jig, fire it out, catching creek smallmouth. So I understand completely. And I mean, I guess the thing that's, one thing you could see is I don't fish tournaments anymore, Randy, and part of that is because it's a pain in the butt for me to fish tournaments because I know what I need to do to go win or do well in a tournament, and I just don't want to do it. Like, honestly, if I want to go do well in a tournament, I need to go out for 2 days, graph offshore for 2 days straight, spend a ton of time doing that, then go fish, deal with all the boat traffic, the other fishermen, get stressed out about going and catching fish, make it this big thing about money. That for me just is not enjoyable. I just don't enjoy doing that. For me, what I do is I set my own personal challenges. So, for example, like the other day, I went out and caught a 10-pounder. I caught a 10-pounder. First fish I caught was actually a 5-pounder on live scope with a jerkbait. I then turned the live scope off, turned off my 360 imaging, and just started using my old school methods. Because I just was like, okay, I figured them out with the live scope. I want to try to catch them now without it. I then caught a 10-pounder without the live scope, without anything on a jerkbait, in the same way I caught them with the live scope and caught 2 or 3 more fish. And for me, I just like that experimentation, that testing it out. I even went, like last year, we went to Grand Lake, and I remember we did an offshore versus shallow challenge, and I went back out the next day, and I think, both of us really struggled to go find him and catch him with electronics and with our normal setups. And I think you had like 2 or 3 fish that day. I had like 2 or 3 fish. fishing all day. Well, next day I went out and I said, I'm going to go out and fish out here with no electronics. I'm going to take everything off my boat and just fish my instincts, but fish offshore. So I did offshore fishing with literally no electronics, just a contour map. I went out and crushed them. I had like 18 pounds fishing offshore, no electronics, just fishing my instinct, reading the contour maps, the wind, the currents, the everything going on. And that for me was so fun. And I think that that's one thing you have to do with fishing is if you make it all about tournaments and about fishing for money and all that stuff, it can get a little bit overwhelming. And I think that's what a lot of guys are frustrated with the live scope is like they feel like you need the live scope to compete. And at times you do. That's the thing. And or you have to learn all these techniques and all these different things. For me, I like fishing offshore. That's just what I enjoy doing. I like using the live scope to learn about bass behavior, to understand things more. I take it more of a scientific approach to it. But there's so many opinions. I know we're kind of just ranting now, but that's kind of my take on it. And I know a lot of guys feel the same way. I know a lot of guys are saying no electronics, nothing. Some guys still like the electronics. It sounds like more guys are siding on your end, Randy, with the no electronics, which might be just the demographic, age demographic here too. But as you know, Randy, he doesn't fish with any electronics. I love the electronics, and we try to give both perspectives.
Well, and that's the whole thing about it. I mean, this is sort of an emotional issue because it sort of gets into the core of your being as an angler, what type of angler you are. But I think what we have to sort of be a realist at the same time, and what we have to focus on is so much of this is on the shoulders of the tournament organizations. And if all this technology is going to continue, and Garmin and Lowrance and all these companies, if they're going to continue just to pump out all this high-tech stuff and it's a rat race to keep up with it and everything, at what point do tournament organizations have to make some type of a decision on this? One of the things that I would like to see that sort of satisfies both things is, okay, tell Garmin, tell Lowrance, go ahead, do your research, develop new products, that type of stuff, but don't allow them in tournament competition. Or, even at the least say, okay, you can use your live scope or your live active target in practice, but during official tournament competition, they are not allowed in the boat. There's ways to compromise on this where we can maintain sort of that purity of competition, yet not stifle technology at the same time. But I've been one of those. I'm sort of one of those people that I think technology is great. Certain aspects of technology and certain technologies are great, and I also believe that there's some technologies that are not good. They lead us down the wrong path. So basically what we have to do here is we have to compromise. I would love to get some of the tournament, directors on the podcast here to have this conversation. If you could get them to talk without being in fear of losing sponsorships from the electronic companies. Obviously, I am never going to have a sponsorship from an electronic company with my stance, but if we could just take money out of this whole equation, I think we would see all this stuff different. But from your standpoint, like I said, guys like yourself, Jonny, you guys are offshore electronic experts. You know how to use the technology, and I don't want this to come across that I'm telling anybody they're a bad person for using this technology. That's not what the point is. It's a much bigger picture. I'm looking at the whole big picture as far as 50 years down the road here, and I'm concerned. It's like I've been fishing bass fishing for over 50 years, and I'm a little concerned about in another 50 years when my son Elijah is bass fishing and he's my age or older. I mean, I don't know what type of world that looks like as far as our waters, that we can go into the environmental aspect of it or the technology aspect. But I don't really like the way it's looking, man, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, that's a deeper topic than I don't know if I'm qualified to talk on that one. But one thing that I did like over here that Justin had said, he said basically having no electronics in tournaments will never happen because guys using 360 imaging or live scope is what sells the units, which is 100% true. How many active targets have sold and live scopes have sold after watching Dustin Connell catch him on that tournament over the brush piles, or all these different guys, and then promoting it? So I don't think that it's ever going to go away. I think it's probably just one of those deals where you're going to have to, you're either gonna just have to say I'm not gonna fish it and do the Bill Lowen, John Cox approach. And if you want to compete, just take your lumps in the tournaments where the live scope is effective, or just adapt. There's really not any other option tournament wise. That doesn't mean though for an average angler you need it, and that's one thing I wanted to show with my upcoming video, Randy, with the data I collected, is that honestly, for the average fisherman, going and buying a live scope is not going to make you a 10 times better bass fisherman. That video will be posted as soon as I can get a computer that will allow me to edit the video. But basically, one thing I was finding is like I actually got a new unit in, Randy, that I'm gonna do some testing on, and it is a Humminbird Helix 5 Gen 2 unit. This is a $400 unit if you get the top of the line with the side imaging, down imaging, with everything in it. And this has really good sonar, down imaging, side imaging. It's the same down imaging and side imaging I had in my Onyx unit, and I've been using, again, I used that up until 8 months ago, and all of the recordings on my entire YouTube channel, practically for almost the entire life of my channel, have come off of units with the same exact imaging software. And you get contour maps, you get down imaging, side imaging, all these different things. I want to really make a video and just show guys what this unit can do, because I feel like I can find just as many fish with this unit as any other unit. I mean, right now I'm running a 9-inch Humminbird Helix unit like this, and the only difference really, it has mega imaging, but I can set the settings up where it's not that big of a difference at the end of the day, not enough to make a huge difference, and the only difference is really just the screen size. So there is a lot of ways you can find offshore fish without breaking the bank with your electronics. The hardest part is just finding hours and hours and hours to go to the lake to find and catch those fish. That's, I think, the bigger barrier to entry, and that's a bigger discussion from electronics in general, but like, who wants to go when you have 6 hours to fish on the weekend? Who wants to go graph for 4 of those 6 hours when you get one chance to fish a month, or 2 chances to fish a month? It's a little bit impractical unless you're really like into it and you really want to do it. And so it narrows the audience for that sort of thing. But there's obviously people who still want the electronics. So my goal is to continue to educate people on the fact that you can catch 90% of the fish just using 2D sonar, side imaging, down imaging. And then the extra 10%, maybe the extra 15% is what live scope will catch you. It helps you catch an extra fish or 2 when you go to the lake. It's not going to take you from catching no offshore fish to catching 100 offshore fish. That's not how it works. There's a lot more into it.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people misunderstand, when you have somebody like myself that comes out against live scope, it's not about catching the fish, because if I get live scope, I could go get a live scope and I could catch more fish with it, and it could improve my fishing and I would do better in tournaments. But to me, it's a principle thing. It's like an ethical principle thing about my own personal opinion on the whole technology. So I'm not denying the fact that I'm holding myself back. I mean, I'm keeping myself from doing better in tournaments, but I'm willing to make that sacrifice as like a personal, just a personal goal or personal ideas that I have like that. But that's another thing out there, Johnny. It's like when we talk about pricing, you're talking about lower electronics. There are so many options out there for anglers that don't like live scope or can't afford live scope. And that's one of the good things about you guys that are listening to this channel right here. You guys have got the #1 offshore electronics guru right in front of you with Jonny, with no doubt. And you're going to get that info from him. He can, if you guys want to learn that, it's out there to be learned from. Everybody can learn something. And if you want to learn some of the old school stuff, how to catch fish up on the bank, and I don't mean like, I have nothing but hellbenders in my boat, and, I'm that old school, but shallow fishing is science. I mean, shallow fishing and deep water fishing both are art forms within their own sense. They require stealth, they require intelligence, they require focus, they require commitment. So I think a lot of times we get this image in our mind that somehow if you're a deep water fisherman, if you use your electronics, you're a little bit more advanced mentally and a little bit more smarter and intelligent. And that's just not the case, man. If you guys want to fish shallow water, I'm just saying, you don't have to buy into the fact that you have to go this other direction. There's plenty of options to catch fish shallow. And it's the same if you guys like to fish, deep. if you guys like the live scope, if you like the, all the high tech stuff, then fine. That's something you can perfect, and you can go and you can, develop your angling personality around that. But the conversation that we're having here, my focus, like I said, is on two different topics: the level playing field in tournaments, and not turning this sport into an elitist sport where it's a detriment to competing at that level. So you got two different aspects. You got the tournament world, you got the recreational fishing, and both of them have their own set of rules behind them, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. A couple comments here, Andy. One, someone had asked, I forgot where it was, but I remember someone asked if I fish offshore year-round. Oh, it was Jeff. He said, Jonny, so throughout the entire year you fish deep. Yeah, the last time I made a cast that was within probably 30 feet of the shoreline was maybe, actually I know exactly when it was. It was like April 20th of last year. Because I remember, because I did a video fishing frogs up shallow because I couldn't resist because I love throwing a frog. That's the last time I threw a cast up towards the bank, basically in almost over a year. I just, when you get the offshore bug, and for me, I want to perfect that. And I find I do better when I'm not trying to fish shallow and offshore and do everything. If I focus on one, I do better. And I think it's just the way it is in general. It's hard to go out and try to do both at the same time because it takes a completely different mindset, and you have to really get in tune with either the shallow water aspects or the deep aspects. It's a shift in your mindset. So that's just kind of how I think about it. Another thing that it was pretty interesting, it was from, where was this? There was a really good, people were laughing about it, from Phil here. Let me find this again. Phil, where'd you go? I want to read his exact comment because this was some gold here, Randy. So apparently he said, Randy, they started a no electronics tournament league, but nobody signed up because they didn't get the email.
Yeah, really. That's true. One of my big fantasies, if I could win, the Mega Millions lottery, I'd start my own tournament circuit, and I'd pay $1 million first prize in every tournament, no entry fee, no electronics allowed. That was it. You can have a trolling motor, you can have a 50-horse motor, a 14-foot flat bottom boat, and 100th place pays $50,000 for 100th place. Everybody would be fishing it, and nobody would be fishing anything else. That's sort of my fantasy right there.
Oh yeah.
In a perfect world.
Yep. So. That's some good stuff. One thing, guys, I do want to call out really quick is if you do want more information about how to fish offshore, I know Randy's been, talking about how you should never fish offshore in this whole stream. Just kidding, but this whole stream. But we do have something coming up over on fishthemoment.com. If you guys want to head over to our website, you go to the virtual seminars page. I'm going to be doing another advanced electronics seminar coming up here in a couple days next week. We're almost already at full capacity. I've already opened this up. I keep increasing the max attendance because people just keep asking to sign up. I could only fill 100 spots maximum. That's the maximum possible I can fill up. We're almost like 2/3 the way, 3/4 the way there. So sign up for this advanced electronics class if you are interested, because we're literally going to get to a point where I can't add any more else. The software will not allow it. And in this class, I basically talk about how to use your 2D sonar, side imaging, and down imaging to identify which spots are holding active catchable schools of fish. A lot of times when I graph offshore, Randy, I'm not even seeing fish on my graph, but I still catch fish there. I can actually determine, based on what the surrounding elements look like, if the spot has catchable fish, even if they're not showing themselves on the sonar. Very advanced stuff. It's stuff I've never talked about before on any of my YouTube videos. It's all brand new content. I've done the seminar, I think, 5 times before, and people seem to really enjoy it. You can see over in the chat, guys, some people have already done it, and they've enjoyed the seminar. So definitely check this out if you're interested, and it's going to be a really good course. No live scope in this one, just side imaging, down imaging, 2D sonar, how to really maximize your electronics to find and catch more fish offshore, save some of that 4 hours of graphing time, make sure it's useful and efficient. And then the other seminar we have coming up is our post-spawn pattern seminar. Randy and I are going to be talking about our post-spawn tournament patterns that we would use to catch big fish, both shallow and offshore. Randy's going to be covering the shallow patterns. I'll be covering the offshore patterns. The post-spawn is my absolute favorite time to fish. You have offshore fish in 2 foot of water out to 50 foot of water, and then the shallow fishing is really good as well. So we're going to have a ton of information, very specific patterns, showing you areas, electronics images, contour map, everything you need to know, showing spots where we've caught actual fish in tournaments, literally exact spots Randy and I have done really well in tournaments or just fishing in general. So check out the seminar as well if you want to learn more about post-spawn tournament patterns, and that's going to be coming up here in a couple of weeks. Another thing too, real quick guys, is check out our lake breakdowns. You get 40 GPS waypoints on lakes all across the country. You get a detailed area description and some keys to fish in the lake. We got lakes all across the country broken up by season. You guys have probably heard this before. We also have our personal lake breakdowns that sell out every Monday within posting them within 2 hours. So if you want a personal lake breakdown, check back every Monday. They sell out really quick. So that is that, Randy. You had to get our shameless plugs in. That's the only way we support this podcast or this live stream. We don't have any sponsors. We have more viewers than like pretty much everyone else live, but we have no sponsors. Everyone else has like 77 sponsors. It seems like every company, they have to have some sort of subscription box, some sort of alcohol, some sort of food, something or other, and then they have another like fishing company. So like that's the trend in like 4 fishing companies. So look at like 7 or 8 sponsors paying them. We have our website, and I have a pen. That's pretty much all we got. It's the website. So if you guys enjoy the content, head over to the website and help us out. That's all we got. No sponsors. That's the way we roll.
Oh man. Hey, I don't know if a lot of people know it, but back in the early 90s, I was like the offshore Johnny Schultz type guru before anyone else was. I want to tell you guys this little story because this sort of tells you how the transformation. But back in the early 90s, I got into this whole triangulation deal with maps and flashers on Grand Lake. And I was able to find a ton of offshore stuff, just like what Johnny does. I spent a ton of time running around the lake. The maps we had back then weren't any good, so you had to find this stuff just by chance running across it. But there was a 2 or 3 year period there where I found all this offshore structure with my flasher through triangulation, and did super great in tournaments for like a 2 or 3 year period when the fish were using that offshore structure. And the problem you have with that is if you don't keep up with that technology and master that offshore metamorphosis, you get left behind like I did. Every year I didn't upgrade my technology. I didn't upgrade my GPSs. I didn't upgrade my electronics. I stayed with the same electronic technology. Before you know it, I got left behind. And it's just sort of the same deal now, guys. If you guys are into the live scoping or side imaging or down imaging, if you guys are committed to this way of fishing, and this is something that you really enjoy doing, you have got to keep up with it all the time. You've got to stay on the cutting edge. You've got to stay ahead of the cutting edge, or you'll get left behind like I did in that aspect of fishing. So a lot of it is just really what you want to, put your attention into. And like I said, for me, that's not where my passion laid. Mine was in shallow water fishing. So, I got stronger in that area and it got weaker offshore. So, like I said, just keep up with that technology or you get left behind with it.
Yeah, one thing I like to say too, Randy, is that when I do a lot of my seminars, and we do seminars together, and also just a lot of my videos, I focus a lot on bass fishing theory and bass behavior because honestly, electronics, everyone thinks about these electronics as like, oh, you shine the electronics down there, it helps you catch fish, you can see the fish or whatever. At the end of the day, though, there's not fish in every part of the lake. There's probably only fish in 10% of a lake. And so even though you know that, for example, on Lay Lake here, that the fish might be offshore, it's like, where do you go on this lake based on the season, the time of year, the water clarity, water temperature, current flow, wind direction? And then when you get out here, are they on stumps, rocks? How do they relate to stumps? How do they relate to rocks? What baits to throw? What equipment to use? which spots have active fish versus non-active fish. There's a million factors that go into it that go way beyond just buying a fish finder. And I think so many guys buy a fish finder because they want it to be this quick fix. Everyone wants a quick fix out there. It's the common with our culture now, especially with the millennial group and even the older group. They want a quick fix. They want to go buy a $500 fish finder or a $1,000 fish finder, have it show them the fish, and have them catch more fish. That's the whole reason they buy it. But nothing's really ever that easy, Randy. It's not like you can go buy a $300, $400 golf driver and start driving the ball like Brooks Koepka or Bryson DeChambeau. You can't do that. You gotta get in the weight room. You gotta lift some weights. You gotta work on your form. There's a lot of other factors that go into it. Learning the course angles, swing pass, all this stuff. Same thing with fishing. There's a million factors that go into it, and that's what I focus on way more than the electronics. My electronics are my underwater eyes. It allows me to see what's under the water. For example, if you pull up this lake here, usually this lake is at full pool, but a lot of times it can be, pulled up and it'll be a little bit higher. But you can see when it's drawn down, you can find these isolated targets. And for me, fishing offshore and fishing up shallow are identical in the fact that when you're fishing up shallow, all of your shallow targets are visible. And you have to figure out, are they on the outside bushes, the inside of the bushes, the points, where within this lake are the shallow water fish? How is the currents and all these things affecting the fish? However, when I go fish offshore, all the same things apply. All the same weather conditions, all that stuff applies. It's just, I can't see what I'm fishing. Instead, I have, for example, this little pond levee. When the lake's up, I don't know where it is. So I use my electronics to find that structure, and I can also, as a trade-off for the extra amount of time it takes me to find this area, I can also see the fish with my electronics. So if I'm just using side imaging, down imaging, 2D sonar, I can find fish and be competitive with you because the extra time it takes me to find the cover I need to fish is outweighed by the fact that I know that there are fish there when I fish, versus you can just flip down every single tree down this bank. Instead of spending 30 minutes or an hour graphing, you can make 150 casts. Now, at the same time, getting the live scope, that doesn't help you find this offshore pond levee that has fish on it. If you just put your live scope on and just go from the boat ramp and just start randomly tootling around with your trolling motor out randomly in the middle of the lake, it's going to take you forever to find anything interesting or useful, especially if you don't know what you're looking for. So if you can it kind of reduce some of that time by graphing with your electronics, finding some of these key spots, then using the live scope in combination, then you can actually start catching more fish. It's really all the same. It's just the electronics allow you to fish areas that are under the water you can't see. That's the only difference. All the other factors apply, and you have to know both for both shallow and offshore. I mean, I know all the stuff. I know most of the theory for shallow water fishing too, Randy. I just don't do it because I don't enjoy it as much. But if you ask me how to go catch fish any season of the year up shallow, I've done it one, and I know all the theory behind it. It's just also it takes that repetition and practice. And since I haven't fished up shallow for 3 years practically at all, I'm rusty on my shallow water decision making, my gut instincts. I don't have the confidence. I have a ton of confidence offshore, and I can go graph for 6 hours, not find a fish, but know that in the 7th hour, I might find 2 schools and I'm going to whack them. Versus with you, if you go graph offshore for 2 hours, you might get really kind of antsy and say, man, I want to go flip those shallow laydowns, and you leave. The same thing happens to me when I fish up shallow nowadays. If I'm flipping down a row of docks, I see out behind me a nice little road bed or whatever on the graph, and I'm like, I want to go back out there, and every pitch I make, I'm less confident, and confidence is so important in all of this as well. So, I mean, just to go say, there's a million factors that go into it. It's not just buying a fish finder and going and catching fish.
Well, I mean, contrary to what a lot of people may think that's watching this chat here, I've caught a ton of offshore fish. I've won tournaments cranking offshore. I've done it a ton. And one thing I know about offshore fishing is that offshore fish are a lot easier to catch once you find them than shallow water fish. They're more aggressive most of the time. They're schooled up. You don't have to, there's not as many elements that have to come together to trigger the strike. It's all about finding the fish on the piece of structure and, getting them right when they're set up right on the structure. The opposite is true when you're fishing shallow water. When you're fishing shallow water, there is a lot of elements that come together that are responsible for you generating that strike. I'll use flipping the bush, for example, like this. And this is what I'm talking about, what you talked about, the commitment between the
Mm-hmm.
two is, yeah, you're committed, Jonny, to idling and finding those fish. Once you find those fish, most of the time, they're a lot easier to catch than shallow water fish. But if I'm flipping a row of bushes, I have got 2 dozen different variables that I have to determine to generate the strike from the fish that I know is in that bush. I've got to determine the bait profile. I got to determine the bait color. I've got to determine the fall of that bait. I've got to determine the casting angle. I've got to determine the correct line size. There's just an endless variables that you have to hit on. And if you miss one of those variables in shallow water fishing, a lot of times you're not going to catch it. Therefore, here's the difference. It's like some people, they'll go out and idle around with their live scope or with their side imaging for a couple hours and they just can't see anything and they give up on it and they go back shallow. And then you may have some guys that go up there and they may not know how to flip bushes real good and they go flip bushes for 2 or 3 hours with, a half ounce of jig, and that's the only thing they try. They don't have any luck. They get frustrated and they get back out there and they're graphing again. So each technique is an art form within itself. Each technique, deep, shallow, is a science within itself. And it's a matter of commitment, it's a matter of focus, and it's a matter of just being aware, you know, on the highest level for both techniques.
Yeah, it's crazy because I think so many guys it's so polarizing with like shallow fishing, offshore fishing, and really the biggest factor with fishing, the two biggest things for me are understanding bass behavior with the conditions, the weather, all these things, and also confidence in what you're doing. I can guarantee you, Randy, that if I went out and gave you a hair jig and you went out and had to go catch fish on a hair jig versus you give me a whopper plopper and we went to Table Rock Lake, we would both suck. Because I hate throwing a whopper plopper and you probably don't know what to do with a hair jig very well, so we would not catch him very well. Versus vice versa, I could probably go catch 15 to 18 pounds of fish on a hair jig and you could go catch 15 to 18 pounds in the whopper plopper. Not because we don't know what to do with either of those baits. You know how to fish offshore. I know how to fish up shallow. We've been in the boat with each other when I'm catching the hair jig fish, when you're catching the whopper plopper fish, but our level of confidence in those techniques and our understanding of the nuances of the pattern are so different that it's just going to take us more time to figure it all out and we're just not going to be as effective. So confidence is so important, and knowing kind of, oh, I have a gut feeling that this is the spot I need to go to throw his bait because I've caught him on this bait 100 times in the past. That's really key.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be interesting moving forward because, I see it sort of dividing up in two different camps as far as, all the fishermen across the country. You got the shallow water guys and you got the guys that like to fish offshore. I mean, and everybody, it's just like some people like steak, some people like chicken. And I can just see a lot of the shallow water guys that every time they read about some guy winning a tournament on LiveScope, they start cussing LiveScope. And then, maybe the guys that win shallow, some of the deep guys say, well, he just lucked out on that. That guy, he just doesn't know what he's doing if he's up on the bank there. So it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds. I'm really curious to see over the next 5 years as far as how this evolves, because man, there's so many different elements, there's so many different variables and the direction this can go in. There's a lot of sort of anxiety around it, I think, for everybody to see where it's at, where it's going to wind up at anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I think that at the end of the day, the biggest difference between the live scope era and the non-live scope era, I think at the end of the day, is that the guys are going to be catching those fish again in that different water column, those suspended fish that haven't been touched before. And it's going to be really, really good for a while, and I think it's probably going to become a little bit tougher, and then maybe there's going to be a resurgence. I think it's going to kind of ebb and flow, and that's just how fishing goes. You've seen it over the years, Randy. You fish for 30 years. Sometimes the offshore bite's more dominant, the shallow bite, it comes and goes and comes and goes. I think it's just going to be like that for the future. So, I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen? It could be really, really good. It could be really, really, really bad. Doomsday, as Randy would say. But what are your thoughts there, Randy? I guess in like 5 years, where would you like to see tournament bass fishing? Where would you like to see everything end up?
Well, like I said, everybody. One of the most frustrating cliches I hear is that you can't stop progress. And what some people see as progress, I don't see as progress. I see it as a step backwards for us as a society. The thing that I would like to see happen to tournament fishing and this whole deal we're talking about is there's got to be some limitations put on. There's got to, and like I said, I think uh, a real good middle of the road deal is that these tournament organizations allow you to use any technology, any live scope, whatever in practice, but in competition you can't use it. Everybody is limited to like 2D sonar, side imaging, down imaging. No forward facing technology is allowed during the tournament competition. I think that's a fair compromise that I think a lot of people could live with, except for the guys that are making a living with live scope. The other thing that I would like to see happen down the road is we've got to put a cap on the exploding cost of fishing, whether it
Mm-hmm.
be boats, whether it be, tournament entry fees, trucks, whatever, that type of stuff. There's got to be some type of a cap because, man, when I was 18 years old, I mean, I was working two jobs just to put money in my 14-foot flat bottom with a 9-horse motor. So I understand what it's like not to have any money when you're young and you're wanting to become a good fisherman. And I see so many young guys getting left beside the road. These guys are passionate about fishing, they love it, and they're never going to have that opportunity. And the worst thing, I never want to squash anybody's dreams and say, look, dude, you know, unless you've got some financial resources behind it, you're never going to be pro fisherman. That's where we're headed to, guys. That's the reality of it. Unless you have some type of a financial safety net, wealthy family, independently wealthy, you simply can't get out here and fish these top level tournaments. You can't do it. And I would like to see that turn the other direction to be back where kids or anyone that they're not discriminated against because they don't have the same financial resources as somebody else. That would be my ideal scenario. Those two things.
Yeah, and then that gets back to the whole argument of growing the sport of bass fishing, and then guys say, well, we can't grow it too much farther. There's not enough lakes to go around if we grow it too much bigger because you're going to run out of water. It's a whole never-ending cycle, but I agree with you, Randy, about that. One thing that's really cool, for example, like with me, I had the opportunity to fish professionally if I wanted to take that path. I was in college. I won a college regional championship. I was like on that path to become a tournament angler. That was like my goal was to fish the Elite Series. And I just realized, one, financially, it just doesn't make sense. Being a professional tournament fisherman is basically high stakes gambling with a little bit of financial support, maybe. But really, that's all professional fishing is at the end of the day. And it just, for me, as an economics major, as a having my MBA, it didn't make sense to me financially to do it. And so I was able to find a different path. And I think there's a lot more paths with social media now to be able to make a living fishing and, support a group of people. And that's the one thing I love with this business is, we're able to we do what we do, Randy. Between the two of us, we support a few other people working with us to be able to have, our passion, build a business, and it's all thanks to you guys, all the support. I know some guys were over there gawking at the seminar signups and the prices and stuff like that, but we just try to make it so that we can, cover all of our expenses, guys. We're not trying to price gouge you or anything like that by any means. It's just the time we put in. We put a ton of hours into all this content. I spend 40 hours a week editing a free YouTube video. And then we do the seminars, and then we do all this other stuff. And we have a bunch of people working behind the scenes with us. And we try to be as responsive on email as we can, everything, because we want to make really good quality content for you guys. We never want to short you. That's kind of our goal. And we're just really blessed we're able to do that. So I really appreciate all the support. I know, Randy, you do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wake up every morning and the way that everything's unfolding here, guys, what's happened, how Johnny's channel's unfolded the past 2 or 3 years, how mine's going really good. And like Johnny said, if you guys weren't here as joining us with this adventure we're on, it wouldn't be possible. So, man, I give thanks every day for that, to have a passionate, loyal fan base that likes the stuff that we're doing out there because I think that Fish the Moment and my channel, Intuitive Angling, I think we've got the most passionate, loyal fan base of anyone out there. I mean, so many of them, so many other channels out there have these sort of casual, subscribers and participants. But man, everybody out there is really engaged in what we're doing. And just keep the comments coming, because one of the ways we can gauge what we're doing is from the comments that we get from you guys. And like with Jonny here, we read every single comment we get. I've got 4 kids to take care of. Johnny's super busy, so we can't respond to everything, but I take time to read every one of them. So I just want everybody to know that.
Yeah, just so you guys know, like Randy, we need to figure something out because Randy's worked with us. He has 3 or 4 kids, right, Randy?
So yeah, 3 at the house and 1 out of the house.
Yeah, and so got that, and like, I mean, you work your tail off. You're sending me late breakdowns like 11 o'clock at night, and the sad thing is I'm getting your emails because I'm on the computer at 11 o'clock at night. So we work our tail off to make sure we give you guys great information. That's, for me, it's always satisfying to put out a video where I feel like someone's actually going to learn and take away from it. And that's one thing we don't like. That's why we don't have a lot of sponsors, guys, is because if every other word is like, oh, try this bait or that bait or this thing or that thing, if half of it's a sales pitch, how are you going to learn anything? So that's kind of how I think about it, and that's how I've always taken it, Randy. And so we appreciate you guys. Again, all support. Hopefully you're enjoying the content. We're just going to keep on rolling, keep on making videos. Again, I have some computer issues right now. I just had to order a very expensive computer because of all this Bitcoin scalpers who are buying computers up. So computers are like, I spent like $5,000 on a computer, Randy, which is ridiculous.
Oh, man.
It'll run all my 4K editing and stuff, but it's expensive. So computers are not cheap. So I'm getting that shipped from manufacturers. So we're going to get that in. Then the videos will be coming up with more regularity, but my Fish Moment video is going to be down for just a little bit because I don't have a computer that can run all my 4K graphics and all of my all my stuff I like to put in the videos. But we will get that as soon as we can to you guys. And then Randy, you can check out his channel, Intuitive Angle with Randy Blockett. He posts daily, so if you're missing out on content, Randy's got you covered. And then I'll be coming out with some really, really high-quality content coming up here soon. One project I want to talk about with you guys real quick, or let you know about, is I'm planning on going over to Jewel Bait Company. I just got a underwater drone, and it's a super fancy underwater drone, and we're going to be able to follow these baits underwater and show the process of developing and testing baits. So we're actually going to be able to go over there, design like a plastic or design different baits, and then go test them out on the lake, show you the whole process from milling the molds to catching the fish, doing all the stuff, and it's going to be a super cool video. It's kind of like Mythbuster style videos. So that's coming up here next couple months. We're kind of figuring that all out too. So that should be really cool. Underwater bait testing plus bait modification creation plus fish catches. What else can you ask for? So a bunch of cool content coming over to Fish the Moment and over to Randy's channel. So anything else, Randy, before we head out?
Well, I just appreciate it, guys, you hanging around for my anti-livescope rant tonight. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you're a big livescoper, I hope you're not too mad at me about that. But thanks for tuning in. Much appreciated again, guys.
Yeah, thanks again, guys. We will let you know, on social media and all that stuff when any new content's dropping, and then we'll be back live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, same place, same time, the Fish Moment Live channel. Thanks again, Randy, for ranting tonight. Enjoyed it. I'm kind of sad you jumped off the LiveScope bandwagon. You're no longer there. Next thing you know, we're going to be in a canoe with a wood pole that you carved out of the limb of a tree. But we'll see how it goes. But
hey, I just might be going back to wading creeks and catching minnows with my bare hand before it's over with. I go way back there. Napping my own arrowheads and stuff.
Yeah, we're going to be over here milling baits out of like high-tech aluminum, and Randy's over here drilling holes with other stones through stones and like putting curved stone hooks through his thing. It's going to be, we don't know where Randy's going. It's going to be like Randy's survival channel. You toss Randy on an island in the middle of Beaver Lake and leave him there for 30 days and see what he can do. That would be a great YouTube series.
I'll have to tell a story. I went to a 3-week survival school one time. I'll have to bring that up on the podcast. We'll go over some of that. I learned a lot about fishing on that.
Nice. Oh, by the way, Razorbacks, Sweet 16, basketball, Randy, college basketball. Go Hogs, woo pig. There we go. Got John over here, fellow Razorbacks fan. Got my alma mater, rocking in the Sweet 16. Don't talk about sports very much, but I'm a basketball fan, so very excited about that. Thank you for the update, John. Good deal. Well, anyways, have a great night, guys. We really enjoyed having you on the stream tonight, and we'll see you guys next week. Have a good night.